Naomi Clark liked being invisible. Not in the tragic, lonely way people imagined when they talked about being overlooked, the kind of invisibility that left you crying in bathroom stalls or staring at your phone at parties, pretending to text someone who wasn't there. For Naomi, invisibility was something else entirely. It was comfortable, safe, quiet in the very best way. It was the feeling of sliding into your favorite chair and pulling a warm blanket around your shoulders. It was the relief of not being watched, not being measured, not being found wanting. When no one paid attention to you, no one expected anything from you. And expectations, in Naomi's experience, had a way of becoming pressure. And pressure had a way of becoming failure. And failure, well, she preferred not to think about failure at all. Naomi preferred computers. Computers made sense. They operated on logic, on clean rules that could be learned and followed and trusted. If something went wrong, there was always a reason, a misplaced semicolon, a flawed algorithm, a loop that never terminated. Everything had a cause. Everything had a solution. You could find the bug, fix it, and move on. There were no hurt feelings, no misread expressions, no awkward silences that stretched 3 beats too long. People, on the other hand, were unpredictable. They said one thing and meant another. They laughed at jokes Naomi didn't understand and went silent at things she thought were perfectly reasonable. They formed alliances she couldn't see and held grudges she didn't know she'd earned. Working with people felt like debugging a program with no access to the source code. At 28, Naomi was one of the most talented software engineers at NamTech Solutions, a fast-growing cybersecurity company headquartered in a gleaming glass tower in downtown Austin. Her algorithms protected the data of millions of users worldwide, financial records, medical histories, private communications. The work was important, and she knew it. More than that, she was good at it in the way that few people are truly good at anything, naturally, effortlessly, and with a kind of deep joy that never diminished no matter how many hours she spent at her desk. But outside of code, she avoided attention like a well-designed system avoided malware with careful, automatic efficiency. Her frizzy dark curls were usually piled into a loose bun that never quite stayed put, stray ringlets escaping around her temples and the nape of her neck in a way that suggested she'd stopped caring about them somewhere around 9 a.m. and hadn't thought about them since. Her large, round glasses, the kind she'd had since college and never found any reason to replace, slipped down her nose when she was deep in concentration, which was most of the time. Most days she wore oversized sweaters in muted colors, gray, navy, olive green. Comfortable shoes. Nothing sharp-edged or attention-seeking. Nothing about Naomi Clark demanded to be noticed. Which was, of course, exactly how she liked it. Her corner office was both proof of her brilliance and her most prized sanctuary. She had earned it 18 months ago, after designing a zero-day response protocol that had stopped a sophisticated cyber attack mid-execution and saved the company from a breach that analysts later estimated could have cost them upward of $40 million. The company's board had celebrated. The press had written about it in vague, admiring terms. Her name had appeared in a company-wide email from the CEO himself. Naomi had read it once, felt deeply uncomfortable about it, and deleted it. The real reason she loved her office had nothing to do with prestige or recognition. It was private. The door had a lock. And behind her desk, on the low cabinet she'd rearranged on her very first day, sat her personal coffee maker, a matte black single-serve machine that she had researched for 3 weeks before purchasing and which she considered, without any irony, the best investment she had ever made. No break room. No small talk. No colleagues casually mentioning weekend plans and then pausing expectantly, waiting for Naomi to offer something equivalent in return. Just caffeine and code, in exactly the proportions she required. Which was why what happened on a Tuesday morning in late October felt, to Naomi, like a profound and personal betrayal. She pressed the brew button. Nothing. The machine clicked once weekly and then went silent in the way that things go silent when they are not merely resting, but genuinely, irreversibly dead. Naomi stared at it. She unplugged it, waited 10 seconds, plugged it back in with the careful ceremony of someone performing a ritual they don't quite believe in anymore. Pressed the button again. Silence. Darn it. She stood there for a long moment, looking at the machine. Then she looked at her screen, where 10,000 lines of code waited with the patient indifference of all inanimate things. Then she looked at the clock. It was 8:47 in the morning, and she had a problem to solve that required, at minimum, 2 cups of coffee before any serious thinking could begin. There was only one option. The break room. Naomi sighed the way someone sighs before walking into a situation that cannot be avoided, but also cannot be good. The NamTech break room occupied a bright, open corner of the 4th floor, with large windows that let in the morning light and a cluster of small tables where employees gathered to eat lunch, reheat forgotten meals, and, primarily, talk. The room buzzed with easy conversation when Naomi stepped inside, coffee mug in hand, eyes fixed on the machine on the far counter. Immediately, several employees looked up. This alone was unusual enough to register. Naomi was a known quantity at NamTech, brilliant, respected, and nearly entirely absent from any space that was not her office or a scheduled meeting. Seeing her in the break room was approximately as startling as seeing a rare bird that everyone had heard about but no one had actually spotted. She walked to the coffee machine with quiet efficiency. Mission simple. Pour coffee. Leave. Behind her, she heard the whispers start with the subtle hiss of things people think they're hiding but aren't. Is that Naomi? From engineering? I think so. I've genuinely never seen her in here before. Naomi focused on the coffee machine. But before she could complete her extraction, someone spoke up, Mark from the product team, she thought, based on the voice. Hey, Naomi. She turned slowly, mug in both hands. 3 coworkers stood near the counter, watching her with the particular expression of people who are trying to look casual and not quite succeeding. Mark. Priya from marketing. Devin, whose last name she could never remember, from the sales floor. Hi, she said politely. You working on the new encryption patch? Mark asked. We heard it was getting complex. It is, Naomi confirmed. How complex? Think of untangling a set of holiday lights that have been knotted together for 15 years, except the lights are also arguing with each other and occasionally sending threatening messages. There was a beat of surprised silence, and then Mark laughed, a real laugh, not a polite one. Priya smiled. That is extremely specific, Devin said. It's an extremely specific problem, Naomi said. The conversation had used up the full extent of her available small talk reserves. She raised her mug in a small goodbye gesture and turned to leave. That was when she heard it. Behind her, low and urgent, as if she had already moved far enough away not to matter. Wait. Did you see that? She actually talked to us. Another voice, quieter. Oh my God. Mark. I think that might actually work. And then something she couldn't quite catch before she was through the door and back in the hallway, coffee in hand, the break room noise fading behind her. She almost paused. Work for what? But the code was waiting, and the coffee was hot, and Naomi Clark had never in her life been the sort of person who turned around to find out what people were whispering about when they thought she couldn't hear. She kept walking. Behind her, in the warm morning light of the NamTech break room, a plan began to take shape. 2 floors above, in a glass-walled corner office with a view that encompassed most of downtown Austin and a significant portion of the sky, Junho Nam was reviewing quarterly projections and feeling, quietly and without any dramatic flair, exhausted. At 29, he was the founder and CEO of NamTech Solutions. He had started the company at 24 in a 2-bedroom apartment with $17,000, a whiteboard covered in diagrams, and a certainty about the future of cybersecurity that everyone around him had found either impressive or alarming, depending on their personality. 5 years later, NamTech employed over 400 people, held contracts with 3 major financial institutions and a federal agency he wasn't allowed to name publicly, and had been featured on the cover of a technology magazine with a headline that called Junho, to his considerable embarrassment, the quiet architect of digital security. The exhaustion wasn't about the work. Junho loved the work with the same uncomplicated devotion he'd always had. It was something harder to name, the loneliness built into the particular altitude he now occupied. The way people changed when they spoke to him became more careful, more performative, more aware of being watched. The meetings where no one said what they actually thought until Junho had already said it first. The dinners and events he attended because the company required his presence, not because anyone particularly wanted him there as a person. Cybersecurity prodigy, tech genius, ruthless, cold, distant leader. Those were the words people used. He had heard them often enough that he had stopped trying to correct the impression, which had probably made things worse. His assistant, Yuna, knocked twice on the glass before opening the door, a ritual they developed because Junho had, on more than one occasion, failed to notice her standing in the doorway waiting. "Sir, there's a charity gala this Saturday. The Children's Hospital Foundation. The board expects NamTech to attend and have a visible presence." Junho set down his tablet. "Fine, I'll go. There's one more thing." Yuna's voice carried the careful neutrality of someone delivering news they expect to be mildly unwelcome. "They've requested that you bring a company representative, someone to speak to NamTech's community investment. Not just you alone." A beat of silence. "I assume," Junho said, "that when you sent the request for volunteers, no one responded." "Correct. How many people did you ask?" "The whole company." Junho considered this. "I'll request a volunteer at tomorrow's company briefing. In person." It's harder to say no in person. Yuna nodded. "Understood." She paused on her way out. "For what it's worth, sir, most people aren't avoiding the event because of you. They're just afraid of galas." "I know," Junho said. "I'm also afraid of galas." Yuna smiled and left him to his projections. The NamTech all-hands meeting took place on Wednesday mornings in the large conference hall on the third floor, a room with stadium seating and a screen wide enough to make even modest spreadsheets feel cinematic. Attendance was mandatory and people generally arrived early because Junho had a reputation for starting at exactly the scheduled time regardless of who was still finding their seat. Naomi arrived with 4 minutes to spare, enough time to claim the seat she always took, back row, far left, slightly behind a support column that blocked the sight line from the front. She opened her laptop, queued up the encryption patch documentation she'd been reviewing, and settled in. Junho delivered the company updates with his customary economy of language, growth numbers, new contracts, the engineering team's progress on the Q4 product rollout. Naomi half listened while making margin notes in her code, the way she always did in meetings that didn't require her specific input. And finally, Junho said, his tone shifting almost imperceptibly into something a degree more personal, "I need a volunteer to accompany me to the Lone Star Children's Foundation Gala this Saturday evening. The event is a significant opportunity for NamTech's public profile, and I'd like to bring someone who can speak to the quality of work we do here." The room went very still in the way rooms go still when no one wants to be the one to move. Naomi scrolled down to line 847 of the patch documentation. The stillness stretched. She was aware, vaguely, of something happening to her left, a small movement, some shifting of bodies, and then, before she had processed what was occurring, she felt it, her right arm being lifted, firmly and without any hesitation whatsoever, by the woman sitting beside her. Naomi's hand shot into the air. She turned, with the specific horror of someone who has just heard a sound they cannot immediately explain. The woman, Priya from marketing, she realized with a lurch of recognition, was already looking forward, face perfectly composed, the picture of someone who had done absolutely nothing. What Naomi started. "Too late," Priya said pleasantly, eyes still forward. At the front of the room, Junho's gaze had landed with the precise inevitability of a spotlight. "Excellent," he said. The room exhaled. Several people laughed, quickly smothered. "Miss?" Junho asked. Naomi lowered her arm. She felt the back of her neck go warm. "Naomi Clark. Engineering." "Yes." "Good. You'll accompany me. Saturday, 7 o'clock. Junho will send you the details." He moved on without ceremony, returning to the logistics of the rollout timeline as if nothing significant had happened at all. Naomi sat very still for the remainder of the meeting. She had absolutely no idea what had just happened. Tasha, I need help. You always need help, her best friend replied, over the sound of what Naomi recognized as Tasha's kitchen, the particular acoustics of her small apartment on the east side, the faint noise of the city outside. What specifically happened this time? I'm going to a charity gala on Saturday with the CEO of my company. The kitchen sound stopped. Then, a noise that Naomi could only describe as a controlled explosion of emotion. You what? I didn't volunteer. Someone. They raised my hand. It wasn't. I didn't. Naomi, baby, I do not care about the details right now. I need you to listen to me very carefully. Tasha, you are getting a makeover. Naomi closed her eyes. I knew you were going to say that. I have been waiting, Tasha said, for this exact phone call for approximately 3 years. Do not take this away from me. Naomi thought about arguing. She thought about pointing out that she was a grown adult who was perfectly capable of dressing herself, that she didn't need a makeover to attend a work event. That Tasha's enthusiasm for transformation projects was something Naomi had always found gently exhausting. She thought about her coffee maker, sitting dead on her cabinet. Fine, she said, but I'm not wearing anything with a neckline below the collarbone. We'll negotiate, Tasha said. Saturday morning felt like a whirlwind that had been organized in advance. Tasha arrived at Naomi's apartment at 9 a.m. with a list, 2 coffees, and an energy that Naomi privately found alarming at that hour. By noon they had been to a hair salon in South Congress where a stylist named Delilah had looked at Naomi's curls for a long moment and then said, with quiet authority, "Oh, these are beautiful. We just need to let them actually exist," and had spent 2 hours coaxing them into soft, defined waves that fell around Naomi's face in a way that felt, somehow, like a more honest version of herself. Contact lenses at the optometrist Tasha had booked in advance, because of course she had. A makeup artist, a friend of Tasha's, patient and skilled, who used colors so close to Naomi's own that the result looked not like she was wearing makeup, but simply like she had slept well and was happy about something. And then the dress. Tasha had pulled it from the rack of a boutique on 2nd Street with the certainty of someone who had done their research. Navy, floor length, with a draped neckline that was, Naomi checked, precisely at the collarbone. The fabric was something soft and substantial that moved when she walked in a way that felt unexpectedly lovely. When she stepped out of the fitting room, Tasha had pressed both hands over her mouth. "Do not cry," Naomi said immediately. "I'm not crying," Tasha said, with the watery conviction of someone who is absolutely about to cry. "Look in the mirror." Naomi turned to face the full-length mirror mounted on the boutique wall. For a moment she simply stood there. Her curls, which she had always considered a minor inconvenience, something to be subdued and managed, fell around her face in a way that made her look like herself, but more so, like a higher-resolution version of something that had always been there. Her eyes, without the barrier of her glasses, were dark and expressive and large. The dress was the color of deep water, and it fit her body with a kind of uncomplicated honesty that nothing in her regular wardrobe ever had. "That's me," she said. Tasha smiled so hard it looked like it might hurt. "You were always a swan, Naomi. You just hid in duck feathers." Naomi looked at her reflection for another long moment. "The metaphor is a little on the nose," she said. "I know," Tasha said. "I've been saving it." Saturday evening arrived faster than Naomi would have liked. She spent the late afternoon rereading the Charity Foundation's website because if she was going to represent NamTech at an event, she was going to know what the event was actually for, and discovered that the Lone Star Children's Foundation funded pediatric oncology research and had built 3 specialized treatment wings in Texas hospitals over the past decade. She found herself genuinely moved by this, which helped with the anxiety somewhat. She arrived at the venue at 6:58 p.m. because she was always exactly on time and had never seen a compelling reason to change this. Junho was waiting near the entrance, which surprised her. She had expected, well, she wasn't exactly sure what she'd expected. Someone issuing instructions through a phone. A handler from the PR team. Not the CEO himself, standing at the edge of the wide front steps, hands in the pockets of a dark suit that was clearly expensive, but worn with the ease of someone who didn't particularly think about it. He saw her. There was a pause. Brief, but real. He walked toward her, and she noticed that whatever he'd been about to say, some polite, prepared greeting, had been momentarily set aside. "Good evening, Miss Clark." "Please call me Naomi," she said. It came out more directly than she'd planned. Something shifted at the corner of his expression, not quite a smile, but something adjacent to one. "Then call me Junho." He offered his arm. Naomi looked at it for exactly 1 second longer than she should have, then took it. Inside, the gala was exactly what Naomi had expected and braced herself for, a room full of well-dressed people performing ease for one another, the tinkling of glassware, a string quartet in the corner playing something she recognized but couldn't name. She stayed close to Junho's side initially, not from attachment, but from pure social navigation, using his presence as a reference point the way you use a landmark in an unfamiliar city. But something unexpected happened. They started talking. Not in the way she talked in professional settings, careful, targeted, information exchanging. Something more meandering. She made a dry comment about a particularly grandiose centerpiece floral arrangement, and Junho replied with something even drier and more specific, and Naomi laughed before she decided to, which startled both of them slightly. She discovered that Junho had a sense of humor so deadpan it required active attention to catch, which meant most people missed it entirely. She found she liked it, liked that it rewarded paying attention. He asked her questions about her work that weren't the polite questions people usually asked, but precise, specific ones that indicated he had actually read and understood her project reports. And the conversation accelerated from there into the particular pleasure of talking with someone who can genuinely keep up. Around 9 o'clock, they drifted away from the main room and out onto a broad terrace that overlooked the city. Austin spread below them in grids of warm light. The air was cool and smelled faintly of cedar. They stood at the railing for a while without speaking, which was the other thing Naomi was surprised by. The silence didn't feel like something that needed to be filled. "You know," Junho said at last, quietly, "I'm glad you volunteered." Naomi looked down at the city lights, felt the guilt begin to move through her. About that, he turned slightly. So she told him. The broken coffee maker, the break room, the whispered conversation she'd only partially heard. Priya's hand shooting her arm into the air with the confidence of someone executing a plan. All of it. Junho listened the way he apparently did everything, with complete, unhurried attention. When she finished, there was a pause. And then he laughed, a real one, surprised out of him, and it changed his face entirely. "They set us both up," he said. Face entirely. "I think they may have been betting on something," Naomi said, still a little mortified. "I don't know what exactly." Junho was quiet for a moment, looking at the city. Then, well, he turned toward her, and his voice was measured but clear. "Perhaps we should thank them." Naomi frowned. "For what?" "For giving me an excuse," he said, "to ask you on a real date." The city hummed below them. Somewhere inside, the string quartet had moved to something that sounded almost like it was composed for exactly this moment, which Naomi would later find annoying and perfect in equal measure. "You're serious," she said. "Yes." His voice was low and unhurried. "I've read every report you've written in the past 18 months. I've been trying to think of a professional reason to have a conversation with you that didn't involve emergency cybersecurity protocols." She stopped. Started again. "That's surprisingly specific." "I'm a specific person." Warmth moved through her chest, slow and unfamiliar. "Okay," she said. "Okay, I'd like to see you again." She paused. "If that's what you were asking." It was. She looked at the city again, so he wouldn't see whatever was happening on her face. Good. Their first real date was coffee. Not the NamTech coffee. A small, specific place in the East Austin Hills that Junho mentioned because he'd been going there since before the company existed, and it was one of the few places he could sit for 2 hours without anyone recognizing him or needing something from him. They talked for 3 hours. About technology, the real conversation, not the professional one, the one that happened when two people who loved what they did got to stop translating it for an audience. About childhoods, Junho had grown up between Seoul and San Jose, the son of an engineer and a professor, and had learned to code before he could reliably ride a bicycle. Naomi had grown up in Houston, the middle of 3 daughters, and had taught herself programming in the school library because it was the one place that was always quiet and the computers were always available and no one bothered her there. You figured out early that computers were predictable, Junho said. Reliably so. Yes. People aren't. No. He turned his coffee cup slowly in his hands. People think I'm cold, he said. The way he said it, factual, not defensive, made it clear this was something he'd made his peace with but still thought about. Are you? Not intentionally. Then why the reputation? He looked thoughtful for a moment, the way he looked when formulating answers to things that mattered. When you build a company young, people categorize you very quickly. You become the idea of a thing rather than the actual thing. CEO becomes shorthand for a set of characteristics, and people interact with the characteristics instead of the person. He paused. I stopped correcting the impression because correcting it required the kind of sustained openness that felt risky. Naomi looked at him for a long moment. That sounds lonely. It can be. You treat me normally, he said. You did from the beginning. In the meeting when you volunteered, even in the gala. You didn't perform anything. I don't really know how to perform things, Naomi admitted. I've tried. I'm not good at it. I know, he said. That's what I mean. Naomi wrapped both hands around her mug and sat with that for a moment. You're still a person, she said finally. Being a CEO is something you do. It's not what you are. Junho was quiet for a moment. Exactly, he said. The office buzzed with speculation for weeks. The break room crew, Mark, Priya, Devin, and 2 others who had been in on it, cycled between excitement and increasing unease as the weeks passed, and it became clear that their joke had turned into something real. I think they're actually dating. We were joking. I know we were joking. They're apparently not joking. Naomi changed, in ways that were observable even to people who hadn't known her well before. She started arriving to all-hands meetings 5 minutes early instead of 2, taking seats slightly less hidden than her old column-blocked corner. She asked questions in engineering reviews. Not just answering when called on, actually asking things, pushing back on timelines she thought were unrealistic, proposing approaches that hadn't been considered. Her confidence didn't arrive all at once. It came in increments, the way light comes through a window when the sun moves, gradually, then suddenly seeming like it had always been there. She was also, Junho had been careful to ensure, given Real professional opportunity. When the company's largest client came to NamTech with a problem that their existing security architecture couldn't solve, a multi-vector threat that was evolving faster than their standard response protocols, it was Naomi who was brought into the room. Not as a supporting voice, as the lead. She delivered a solution in 72 hours that the client's own security team had spent 3 weeks failing to find. This encryption model, Junho said at the presentation to the company board, represents the most sophisticated adaptive security architecture we have ever deployed. He turned from the board to the assembled engineering staff. It was designed by Naomi Clark. And it is, not to put too fine a point on it, remarkable. The board applauded. Her colleagues applauded. Naomi looked at her hands in her lap for exactly 2 seconds, old habit, small retreat, and then looked back up. She didn't hide. The conversation she overheard happened on a Thursday afternoon, 6 weeks in. She was walking back from a meeting on the 3rd floor, going through a minor corridor shortcut she discovered because it took 30 seconds off the trip and avoided the main hub of foot traffic near the elevators. She heard voices before she turned the corner. Still don't know about the bet. She slowed. They're going to find out eventually. Maybe not. It's not like there's a record. Priya literally made a spreadsheet. She what? She has a whole spreadsheet. Project Swan. I saw it. A pause. They're going to be so angry. We were joking. A note of genuine worry now. We didn't think Junho would actually. Naomi stood still for a moment. Then she walked around the corner. Mark and Devin went silent so fast it would have been almost funny under other circumstances. What bet? Naomi said. The color left Mark's face. Naomi. Hey, we were just. What bet? She said again, more quietly. They told her. Not everything, not in order, not without significant stumbling and at least one interruption where both of them tried to explain themselves simultaneously. But the shape of it emerged. The break room, the morning her coffee maker died, the whispered observation that she'd actually talked to them, the spark of an idea. What if someone could get these two notoriously isolated people into the same room outside of work? The bet had been small, silly, half-joking. $20 and bragging rights. Priya had raised Naomi's hand. Nobody had expected Junho to actually seem pleased about it. Nobody had expected any of this. Naomi walked away before they could apologize. She wasn't ready for apologies yet. She needed to think. She went back to her office and sat in her chair and looked out the window at Austin in the late afternoon light and tried to locate where she actually was in relation to all of this. That was where Junho found her 2 hours later. You knew, she said, when she heard his footstep. I didn't know until the gala, he said. When you told me. She turned to look at him. He was standing near the door, still in his jacket, watching her with the careful attention he brought to things that mattered. So the whole thing was a joke, she said. I was a joke. The bet was a joke, he said. He walked closer, not quickly, giving her the space to decide what she wanted to do with his presence. You were never a joke. They chose me because I know why they chose you. He stopped a few feet away. It doesn't matter. They made a choice that had consequences they didn't anticipate. That happens. She looked at him. Naomi. His voice was quiet and entirely certain. I didn't know about the bet. I chose to ask you to dinner based on the evening we spent together, which I would have asked for regardless of how we came to be in the same room. I chose to bring you into the client meeting. I chose to say what I said in front of the board. He paused. I'm still choosing. That hasn't changed. She sat with that for a moment. They made a spreadsheet, she said. They called it Project Swan. Something passed over his face, the internal processing, and then the almost smile. Of course they did. I might be a little angry for a while, she said. That seems reasonable. But she looked at her hands, then back at him. I'm not actually angry at you. I know, he said. She thought about the coffee shop, the 3-hour conversation, the terrace and the city lights. All the morning since when she had arrived at work feeling, inexplicably, like there was more room inside the day than there used to be. Okay, she said. Okay, sit down, she said. I'll make you coffee. She glanced at her dark, still machine. Actually, I'll need to order from downstairs. My coffee maker is dead. I'll replace it, Junho said. You absolutely will not. That would be wildly inappropriate. I'll have facilities replace it. Anonymously. That's the same thing. It isn't. It is. He sat down in the chair across from her desk with the ease of someone who had been there before and was glad to be back. They ordered coffee from the cafe downstairs and sat in her office while Austin darkened outside the window, and Naomi decided, not loudly, not with any particular ceremony, that she was going to stop being angry. Not because she wasn't entitled to it, but because the alternative was better. She handled Priya differently than she'd handled Mark and Devin. She waited 3 days, not because she was calculating, but because she genuinely needed the time to work out where she stood before she could stand in front of anyone else. On the 4th day, she appeared in the doorway of the marketing department and found Priya at her desk, who looked up with the specific expression of someone who has been waiting for a reckoning and isn't sure if they deserve to be let off easily. I have a few questions about Project Swan, Naomi said. Priya's face did something complicated. Naomi. I am so. I never meant for it to. I know, Naomi said. Can I sit? She sat. Priya sat. For a moment neither of them spoke. Did you actually think it would work? Naomi asked. Priya was quiet for a moment. Honestly, not the way it worked. I thought maybe you'd have an awkward evening and come back slightly less afraid of being in a room with people. That was the best case I imagined. The actual outcome was she trailed off. Wildly outside your modeling, Naomi said. So wildly outside my modeling. Naomi looked at her hands. Why me? Out of everyone you could have pushed forward, why me? Priya hesitated. When she finally spoke, her voice was honest in the way voices get when people have been thinking about something for a while. Because you're the most brilliant person in this company, and everyone in the company knows it except you. And I thought if someone just put you somewhere where you couldn't escape into your office, maybe you'd realize that people actually want to talk to you. She paused. I didn't expect the CEO to ask you on a date. That part was an accident. A very specific accident, Naomi said. The spreadsheet was just for tracking the bet logistics. It got a little out of hand. Naomi looked at her for a long moment. Then, against her better judgment and in spite of everything, she felt the corner of her mouth move. I would like to see the spreadsheet, she said. Priya blinked. You really? I'm an engineer. I find it professionally difficult to be angry at someone for being organized. Priya stared. Then she started laughing, the relieved, slightly hysterical laugh of someone who has been holding their breath for days. Naomi found herself laughing too, not easily, not all at once, but enough. It softened something between them that she hadn't realized she'd wanted softened. They were not instantly best friends. Naomi didn't operate that way. But they were colleagues who had shared an unusual experience and come out the other side with a kind of mutual, somewhat reluctant respect. For the record, Priya said, composing herself, you looked genuinely incredible at that gala. I know, Naomi said. My best friend Tasha has been insufferable about it. There was an afternoon in December, a few weeks before the summit, when Naomi was in Junho's office going over the Q4 security review. This was not unusual. They had developed a rhythm of working meetings that were technically professional and practically something more, conversations that started with firewall architecture and ended up somewhere she hadn't expected, following the particular logic of two people who thought in similar ways and kept surprising each other. Your team is going to run over the deadline on the mesh protocol, she said, pointing at the timeline on his screen. I know. By how much? 2 weeks. Maybe 3. That's going to push the client delivery. I've already talked to the client. They're flexible. He turned to look at her. Why are you reviewing my timeline? Because I walked past the engineering team room this morning and overheard a conversation that suggested no one had told you the actual status. She paused. People sometimes don't tell you things because they're afraid of your reaction. Junho was quiet for a moment. This was one of the things she'd learned about him. He processed direct feedback without defensiveness, but he took a moment with it before he replied. She'd started to appreciate that habit, which was essentially the same habit she had. That's a real problem, he said. I know. I thought you should know it's real too. What would you suggest? I would suggest that in your next team leads meeting, you ask explicitly what the most uncomfortable piece of news is that no one has mentioned yet. You'd be surprised what comes up. He looked at her. Did someone tell you this, or did you reason it out? I reasoned it out. I had the same problem for different reasons. No one told me things because they thought I didn't want to interact with them. The solution was essentially the same. Ask the direct question. He was quiet again, longer this time. You're good at this, he said. Not the work. She already knew he thought she was good at the work. Something else. At what? At seeing the actual problem inside the apparent problem. Naomi looked out his window at the city. I spent a long time watching things from the outside. You see differently from there. I believe that, he said. Outside, Austin went about its afternoon. Inside, Naomi thought that she had somehow, without entirely intending to, become someone who gave the CEO of her company candid feedback in the middle of a Tuesday, and that this felt not frightening, but improbably just right. The NamTech Technology Summit was held in February, a large-scale industry conference the company hosted annually at a downtown venue. 800 attendees, live streamed to several thousand more. Press, partners, The kind of professional audience that had, historically, made Naomi feel like she wanted to be somewhere small and quiet and entirely unobserved. Junho was at the podium for the keynote address. He covered the company's year in review, the new product launches, the direction of the industry. He was a good speaker, unhurried, precise, with the authority of someone who had thought carefully about every word and was confident in their order. Toward the end, he paused. This year, he said, NamTech deployed a new generation of adaptive security architecture that I believe represents a meaningful step forward for our field. It stopped a live multi-vector threat in real time. It has since been adopted by 4 of our enterprise clients, and it was designed, from first principles, by one person. He looked toward the wings of the stage. I'd like to introduce the engineer behind this work, Naomi Clark. The spotlight found her before she had fully processed that she was expected to move. She walked out. 800 people. She found the microphone. She found, looking out at the room, that it was not as terrifying as she'd imagined, or rather, that it was exactly as terrifying as she'd imagined, but that she was doing it anyway, and that those two things could apparently coexist. She talked about the architecture. Not in general terms, in specifics, because specifics were what she understood and what she loved. She talked about the problem and how she'd approached it and what the solution actually did. She was concise and clear and exactly herself. The applause was real. She could tell. Later that evening, she found herself on a balcony again. Different venue, different city view, same cool February air. Junho found her there. You were remarkable up there, he said. Naomi leaned on the railing and looked at the city. You've been saying that word a lot lately, because I keep meaning it. She was quiet for a moment. I was terrified. I know. I couldn't tell? No, he said. You couldn't tell. She let that settle. You helped, she said, putting me in those rooms, saying those things in front of the board. That mattered. The opportunities were real, he said. What you did with them was yours. He moved to stand beside her at the railing. Below them, the conference attendees were spilling out of the venue onto the lit plaza, conversations carrying up in fragments. You know what's funny, she said. What? Everyone keeps calling me a swan. Tasha said it. You said it. There are probably people who are in on that bet who are saying it to each other right now. She paused. But swans aren't. They didn't start as ducklings. That's not actually how it works. The ugly duckling was never a duck. He was always a swan who ended up in the wrong pond. Junho was quiet for a moment, thinking about this. So the transformation isn't the story. The transformation isn't the story, she agreed. The story is finding the right water. So you can finally see your own reflection clearly. He looked at her. I think I've been in the wrong pond for a long time, she said. Not sadly, just honestly. So have I, he said. She looked at him. He was watching the city with his usual quiet attention, and she thought about everything she'd learned of him in the months since a dead coffee maker had sent her into a break room at the wrong moment, that his seriousness was not coldness, that his precision was a form of care, that the person behind the CEO was someone who had also spent years being categorized as a type and had found it lonely in exactly the ways she understood. She reached over and took his hand. He looked down at their hands, then at her. He brought one hand up to cup her chin, then quietly touched her lips with his. She responded in kind to his touch, and they shared the most gentle and comfortable kiss that felt long overdue. Okay, she said, which had become, somewhere along the way, the word she used when she meant something was not just acceptable, but genuinely, quietly right. He squeezed her hand once, and they stood there a while longer, looking at the city. Somewhere between a broken coffee maker, a hand raised by someone else, and hundreds of thousands of lines of code, somewhere in the break rooms and the boardrooms, the balconies, and the coffee shops of a city that had been hers all along, Naomi Clark stopped hiding. Not because someone had changed her. Not because she had become something she wasn't. But because she had, finally, found the right water. And seen herself, clearly and completely, looking back. Thank you so much for watching. Please do me a favor, like, comment, and subscribe for more stories like this. Until the next diary is unfolded, take care.